which there's an irony there. They were repelling the water protectors with the very thing that they were stood there to protect, and using water as a weapon, because at 23 degrees, when you get doused in water, within minutes you're suffering from hypothermia. And again, people were just stood there. You've seen the videos out there. People were stood there just taking this and taking this. And you would hear these cries of medic, medic, we need a medic on the front lines. And the hooting of the horns of the cars coming down there. And the trucks coming through. And you'd watch people being ferried back off to medical. I mean, I know yourself, you were actually, rather than live streaming, you were down right in amongst everything.
Yes, my decision to do that was based on seeing people like yourself who were clearly holding smartphones or other kind of devices, which is great. I mean, that is such a necessary thing. But a couple of days before that, on the 15th, the DAPL guys had beaten me up, and I got a pretty good gash on my head from that. And then the police confiscated all my filmmaking equipment, my DSLR, my GoPro, my brand new iPhone, which again, I don't like having an iPhone even, but I felt as though I needed to have the latest thing so I could live stream these things. I had, all that I was left with was this crummy $60 camcorder, which I'm still shooting with now. And,
it's great.
And John Bolenbaugh, if those of you who know him, he handed me one of his cameras too, so I had that as a backup. But it was very just seat of the pants, and I knew that, I mean, without any kind of live stream, and that's what everyone else was doing, I figured I'm just going to get right in there in the thick of it. So I got in as close as I could. I definitely took in quite a bit of tear gas. I was in the mist of the water. I knew that if I got too much closer, then it would kill the cameras, and it was important to document it, I felt like, at that time.
No, absolutely. I thank you for doing that, because I've seen some of your videos afterwards, and there's one particular video I remember seeing where there's a water protector on the ground, already no threat to anyone whatsoever, and there's an officer stood there with pepper spray, just dousing this person on the floor with pepper spray. I also saw a picture of someone with their hands up, walking away, getting shot. I mean, that night, the way the law enforcement acted was not to preserve safety, was not to protect and serve. They acted as an army. Now, it was crazy, because there was, on one side you had water protectors who were peaceful, who were unarmed, who were there in prayer. And on the other side, you had the very people who were supposed to protect and serve, and they were the ones who had all the weapons. I mean, we mentioned tear gas, we mentioned the LRAD, we actually now mentioned pepper spray. There were pepper spray and mace. We mentioned the water cannons. They also had the non-lethal projectiles, which were the rubber bullets. I believe they had beanbag rounds. They also had flashbangs and concussion grenades. And if I get some of this terminology wrong, I've been picked up on this many times. I don't know what the terminology is, because I'm just an individual member of the public. I don't have experience with protests. I do not have experience with activism. I do not have experience with police procedure. I do not have experience with what riot police use. I mean, I learned the name LRAD that night. So I was learning as I went on. It was crazy. It was 7 hours or 8 hours or whatever it was, but it didn't seem like that. I mean, I didn't even realize how cold it was. It wasn't until I remember getting back to my tent and taking stuff off that I had like frozen on the inside of my coat. But you didn't, while you were in the moment and while you were seeing this, you couldn't believe what you were seeing. It was like you were in a war zone. But it was a war zone with weapons on one side. And the things that I've seen don't ever leave me. The things that I heard that night will still haunt me for the rest of my life. I mean, for days afterwards, even though I had only been live streaming from a distance, I was affected hugely by what I'd seen and what I'd heard. And I mean, that night I did have various people come up to me who had come from being down right in amongst the blockade, coming up onto the hill. I had my good friend Lindsay Norton, who had gone down there to take some emergency blankets for protection for the people at the front lines. She had been tear gassed, and she had been tear gassed so hard that she'd actually coughed so hard she'd peed her pants, and she came up and told this story on camera. Actually, she had to sit down on the hill at that point because she really couldn't stand. But she told that story, and she explained about the box situation down there and how it was, and like how the tear gas was being used. And then there was another young gentleman whose name I never caught who came up, who told me how he'd literally been stood next to someone who had been shot in the head that night. And went through, like, it literally scalped the person. And I think who he was stood next to was a guy called Israel, because Israel was shot in the head. So gradually, as the night went on, and even as the days unfolded afterwards, and I got to understand more and more about it, I gradually, these stories I'd heard on the night, I started to put together with the people. But that night was, it's hard to talk about. I'll be honest, I can talk about it more now because I've had to talk about it more. But a lot of the times when I start talking about it, I'll well up. I'll find it hard to have that conversation. I have tears in my eyes because...
I can see you have them now. I mean, it's not waterfall yet.
Yeah, no, it's...
I mean, I know just from, in that video you see of mine, the two people in prayer. And first they come by and mace him. That's not good enough. They have to come by and pepper spray him. And then they still don't leave. They take out those guns and just pop, point blank, pop, pop. I mean, I can't imagine what's going on in their minds that makes them think that this is a reasonable thing to do to another person, or that it's even going to help this situation tactically. I imagine maybe some of them are coming from a military background, or maybe they don't, because I would think from the military you'd say that this is nonsense. There's barbed wire here protecting them, that we weren't able to hurt them. So what would be the point of coming by and macing someone, then peppers? These are two people in prayer, and just one after the other, pepper spray, mace, fire them in the face. Just good God, what do you? There's no tactical purpose. They're not hurting you. Why do it?
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up a very, very valid point. So when we describe the bridge, you have the concrete, which were like the big concrete blockades, and then you have reams and reams of razor wire and barbed wire. Mm-hmm. And then
it was razor wire.
There's razor wire there. And then on the other side, you have the constabulary. You have Morton County, you have the National Guard, and you have, at one point, there were police from, I think, 5 different states. It may have been more than that. I remember Hennepin County came up, and they're from Minnesota, and the Minnesotans were so upset about their police force being up at Standing Rock attacking these water protectors that they took over the building in Hennepin County, and that peaceful action, caused Hennepin to pull back their force completely. I know they had New Mexico in North Dakota. Like, New Mexico's like here? North Dakota's up here somewhere. Like, where? Like, how? Why? There's some really, really crazy things that were done. And then, I mean,
I think that there is an answer to that, and that they're using the disaster relief laws in order to basically appeal to other states, and they get financing for that, and that's why they'll bring in these people from the other states. That still doesn't get to the moral root of why they're doing it, but that's on the flip side of morality, money. I mean, they said, it's a little extra work. I don't know if they're getting hazard pay, overtime pay, and guys out there, they all have families too. I imagine in their minds they're thinking this will be a little extra Christmas money. This will be a little bit of money towards their mortgage or whatever it may be. But you have to realize that at what cost? The cost is at the people of Standing Rock. The cost is at the people downstream of the oil flow, which again, it's going to leak. It's not a matter of if, it's when.
Absolutely, and that's something we haven't even touched on. We've really been talking about what happened with the water protectors that night, and the effects to everyone that saw that, the amount of PTSD that was in the camp from that night and many other nights. But the reason everyone was there, the various reasons. There's obviously the reason of the people who want to stand up for the indigenous rights, whose land it was originally. There's the people who want to stand up for the environmental rights and to protect the water source, because we have one planet, we have the water that's been here since the beginning of time, that makes up you, it makes up me, and we have the elements that come, the same, what I'm made from, what you're made from, what this couch is made from, all comes from the same thing. So there's these different reasons for being that. And from the environmental side, I mean, using fossil fuels, with everything we know about fossil fuels, doesn't make sense anymore. I mean, we know about the greenhouse effect and the CO2. We know that fossil fuels that come from the earth, the blood of the earth, that we're raping our mother for them, and that they're a finite resource. So they've been going down and down and down and down. And we're tapping into this finite resource. There has to be another way forward. And we found that. We found wind power. We found solar. Mm-hmm. We found geothermal power.
Magnetic.
There's magnetic power. There's all these other solutions. And we could talk all day about this, because, I mean, there's solutions for free energy out there that have been out there for years. And the people that bring them out, they always disappear, or these patents come out for things and they're bought up by the oil companies, they're bought out by the people that have the ability and the money to do that, to nullify and to suppress that technology. So in this situation, we've got a pipeline that's going under the Mississippi, it's going under the Missouri River, Lake Oahu, and these are all very, very sacred places. And we know about oil pipelines. We know oil pipelines leak. If you don't know oil pipelines leak, and you don't know that oil companies cover up these leaks, I recommend you go to dapplelies.com. DAPLLIES.com. It is not the prettiest website in the world. It is not made by someone who is a web designer. It is not made by someone who has experience with press and media. It's made by someone who used to work in the oil industry, in the cleanup business. His name's John Bolenbull. And he saw what happened, and he was so disgusted that he put his life and his family's life on the line and made it his life's mission to whistleblow and show what truly happens with these oil companies. And he's cost them, there was the Enbridge pipeline up in Michigan, and with them having to go back and do the cleanup properly, he's cost them over $1 billion so far, and that's only going to grow. So if you don't know about that, go and check that out. So we know the pipelines leak, we know they get covered up. In fact, I'm trying to remember the statistic, but it's to do with the people that inspect the pipelines. And there's a very small number of pipeline inspectors for a very massive mileage of total pipelines. I mean, the Dakota Access Pipeline, is potentially going to be 1,172 miles, I believe. And I can't remember the exact numbers of inspectors, but basically it would be physically impossible for these inspectors to do their job and inspect the pipelines properly for leaks. And there's a percentage of leak that's okay as well. I can't remember what the percentage is, but
it was 1.5% allowable change in pressure before alarms go off.
Right, so 1.5% of millions of cubic feet of oil. You don't need much oil to pollute an area. And once that pollution's there, you know, it's not like it just sits there and it gets cleaned up. You have all the animals that are part of the food chain who will ingest the oil, and it will have the effects on them. So it's not like this incident happens and we can clean it up right now and it's gone, because when it happens, those animals are still going through there. There's the immediate cost to the bird life that get the tar and the oil on their feathers, and they can't fly and they can't get it off, so they can't lubricate their feathers, so they die. But then you've also got the birds above them and the other predators that will then eat these things that are dying. And then that goes into it gets into the ecosystem, it gets into the food chain. And that continues for years and years and years. So the fact that we accept any amount of leakage is ridiculous. And yeah, people out here are going to be talking about, well, you're saying things that are made from oil, you drive a car. Yes, that's right. But we have so many pipelines already, we don't need more pipelines. We need to find a new way forward. So if we're finding a new way forward, part of that is not to create more and more of the old way. you can't